Ali, group 11, and we're doing Strange Fruit. Strange Fruit is a poem, or it's a song based off of a poem, and it is the commentary on the lynching of African Americans in the southern United States during the 20th century. So a little background on the singer of this song. Her name is Billie Holiday. She was born April 7th, 1915 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her actual name is Eleanor, but she borrowed the professional name from the actress Billy Dove. She's never received training or actually learned how to read music, but she showed up at jazz clubs in New York, which is where her mother moved to, and so this is how she kind of started her career. She accelerated her career by recording hits with Teddy Wilson and then later Lester Young. In 1930, she was introduced to the poem Strange Fruit. She switches record labels in order to record this song, and then this song was later considered the first protest song of the Civil Rights era. Then in 1939, she wrote God Bless the Child, and then recorded numerous records, made appearances on TV, redefined herself as the torch singer. 1958, she signs with Columbia Records, and then later at the age of 44, she died, 1959, and she had a major and long-lasting impact on jazz music.
Hi, I'm Nick McGee, and the political climate at the time the song was written and performed, this is in 1930 when the lynching of African Americans was reaching peak levels, and it wasn't just exclusively African Americans, but it was 70% African Americans, and this would start in the 1830s, this trend, and it was at the peak at the time of the song. And this came, of course, at the time of the Jim Crow laws in the South that would contribute to the disenfranchisement of African Americans. And even though this was like the anthem of the movement to stop lynching, there was still other literary references to lynching, like Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn and Owen Wister's The Virginian. And Northern legislators, starting in 1907, took many attempts to outlaw lynching, but had failed to pass any substantial bills at the time of this song's release.
Hi, my name's Zach. A little bit of background on the poem. It was originally written by Abel Meeropol under the pen name of Lewis Allen. He was a Jewish school teacher in New York at the time that had, I guess, found some news about the lynchings that were happening in the South and wanted some form to express that, and ended up writing a poem that is the same words of Strange Fruit at the time, and began reading it at teacher union meetings. And over time, there was a tune addressed to it that I believe he wrote, and that would eventually end up getting picked up by Billie Holiday. Interestingly, he was publicly communist and was very open about this fact throughout his career. And after the Rosenbergs were executed for espionage, he adopted both of their children. And so as he kind of was involved in all these different organizations, different things, he actually would go to the manager of the Cafe Society, which is the first manager who kind of heard the song and introduced it to Billie Holiday, and kind of wanted to sell the song to him, like, hey, this could be a great song, could have a lot come out of it.
Howdy. So I'm John Carlos Wickers, and that was just the first verse of the song. The lyrics are written over here. So in the beginning, the first verse describes the image of a black man hanging from a tree, a black man being lynched in the South. So the black man would often be lynched. It was like Nick had mentioned before, it was predominantly black men who were being lynched, though there were other lynchings as well. So according to Encyclopedia Britannica, they say that lynching is a form of violence in which a mob, under the pretext of administrating justice without trial, executes a presumed offender, often after inflicting torture and corporal mutilation. That's what would happen to these black men during their lynchings and then eventually being hung from the tree. So trees, in her words, trees in the South bear strange fruit. It's to evoke the image of fruit normally hanging from trees, apples, blackberries, all those things that they hang from the trees. In this case, it's just a black man. It's different. It's not what's normal. It is a strange fruit that only grows in the South. Blood on the leaves. This blood or poison has been seeped into the soil of the South, and it's so ingrained into their society and so is a part of who they are that it just represents America at the time and how racial prejudices really governed a whole lot of what was going on during this era. And so the land became so corrupt with the intolerance towards people of color during this time, hence them being the ones who were marked with most of the lynching. Finally, black bodies, all the way down to her final line of strange fruit hanging. The writer Meeropol right here, he's trying to end the verse in a similar way, in a similar fashion as how he started it, so that way he can leave you with this image of just a grotesque image of a black man being hung from a tree, being lynched, probably for nothing. And it's just so horrendous what was going on in this society at this time.
Pastoral scene of the gathered sound, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh.
Hi, I'm Michael, and I'll be discussing verses 2 and 3. Here in verse 2, the first line is pastoral scene of the gallant South. So, especially in this song, there's pastoral elements in the music because these elements have been around for a long time, and it's describing the beautiful countryside of the antebellum South, as well as the idealized chivalric values the society was based upon. However, in the next line, the gruesome lyrics soon interrupt the picturesque scene with the truth of the situation. The gallant South is really built on the backs of the enslaved blacks. Racism still runs rampant in the South even after the end of the Civil War. The bulging eyes and twisted mouth depict a poor victim of a mob lynching. The next line is scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh. So magnolias are actually the state flower of both Mississippi and Louisiana. And both of these southern states were heavily dependent on the plantation economy, which obviously utilized slavery. These flowers represent purity and nobility, especially for a bride on her wedding day, which kind of contradicts the next line, the sudden smell of burning flesh. The switch from magnolias to burning bodies shows that both are often seen in the Deep South, and often the bodies of lynched victims were lit on fire.
Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rise.
So that was the final verse of the song. It starts out, "Here is fruit for the crows to pluck." This line represents the perpetual crows visiting the dead bodies as a source of food. Although they do eat actual fruit, because they also eat dead carcasses, sometimes they're associated with like being with death or a messenger of death. And the crows could also refer to Jim Crow laws, which were discriminatory statutes put into effect after the Civil War. The southern states often have fierce climates, and bodies are left exposed to the elements in their death. This is very disrespectful and often served as a warning to other blacks and slaves or any people that were discriminated against, just to kind of stay away from the area. Next line, the next line, "For the sun to rot, for the trees to drop." Another repulsive but accurate line relaying how their victims would rot until they fell from the rope they were hung on. As the bodies fell apart, they would fall to the ground, much like fruit does when it rots. This line also symbolizes that just as the bodies were helpless to resist the natural decay of dead things, so too were the African Americans in the political and social climate concerning their treatment. The final line, "Here's a strange, bitter crop." So these lines show the cruel social structure in which blacks supported plantations to produce their crops. They have now become a bitter crop in that their cruel death gives other slaves bitter emotions every time their bodies are seen in the trees. This is contrary to the happiness that many feel when they see a blooming flower or a budding fruit tree.
Hi, I'm Brett Dillon, and I'm going to talk about the responses to Strange Fruit. So Billie Holiday had a very particular way that she would introduce the song whenever she was performing it. She would always save it till the very last song of the performance, where she would have all the lights turned down. And she'd be sitting there with a single spotlight illuminating her face as she sang the song. The audience would be captivated until the end, where the lights would turn off, and by the time they turned back on, she had left. So she was always very careful about where she performed this song. She always made sure that it was an open and kind of liberal audience before she would perform there, because she knew that although a lot of people were strongly moved by this song, not all of the responses were positive. So she had sang this song originally. She was a large activist during the civil rights, well, before the civil rights movement, and this kind of, as one producer said, was maybe the beginning of the civil rights movement, or of the talks surrounding the civil rights movement. Today, Strange Fruit has been hailed as a song of the century and is in the Grammy Hall of Fame. And listeners to this day continue to say that this song has caused them to empathize and take action with the civil rights movement, even 80 years after its release.
So in conclusion, we believe that Strange Fruit and the history behind it kind of display the difference in daily life of Americans based on the color of their skin, on how an African American person living in the South will have a completely different way of life, a completely different way of living their life than a Caucasian individual in the northern states in the United States, and that how separation in cultures and societies kind of define how different the United States was for so many people at this time. And we believe that the song displays that very well. And we believe that through the way that the song was presented and the story behind it, it's a great way that Billie Holiday and Abel Meeropol kind of artistically chose to display the flaws and the errors in American culture and society. Here are our citations. And for contribution, we all did about the same jobs, working on the presentation, research, and assembling the PowerPoint. Thank you very much for your time.